So I'd like to welcome everybody to another edition of the e-NABLE Bionics design meeting. We have these once a month. It's the first Friday of every month. So that happens to be the 1st of April for us today. We have different topics for each meeting and a guest speaker. So today we have Skip and John with us from the Moto Gripper project, and they're going to talk to us about their design process and also the value of low-tech devices within e-NABLE and I think more universally. So without further ado, maybe John, if you want to introduce Skip, and Skip, if you want to introduce John, that'd be great.
Well, I'll introduce Skip, and then he can present. So I'm John Shull, co-founder of e-NABLE, and e-NABLE was started while I was at Rochester Institute of Technology, where I had a lab that eventually was called the e-NABLE Lab. And I was working with Skip for a while, and eventually he became sort of co-leader of that lab. And thus began a multi-year collaboration, which continues to this day. So here's Skip next. Or do you want Ben to say hello to Ritesh and Patrick? Let them introduce themselves before Skip.
Yeah, go ahead. And then I'll introduce the rest of myself. So go ahead, Ben and
Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Patrick. I'm from Canada, BC, and in the Richmond area, or Greater Vancouver, you can say. My background is from robotics, and I recently retired and trying to find something meaningful to do.
Great. And Ritesh? If you can hear us, you're on mute.
This is Ritesh from Goa, I believe.
I think it is. So Ritesh, he's just added in the chat that he's sorry. So maybe the audio or video are not working. If you can hear us, do you want to add in an introduction in the chat? He's having some issues. Okay.
He's having some issue. We'll if you resolve the issues, we'll be happy to say hello, Ritesh.
Great. So he can hear us.
Okay. So Skip can proceed, and he wants to start by sharing his screen.
yes. So let's see if I can do that successfully. No, there.
Good.
Okay. I'd like to start by saying the whole heart of everything I've been doing is a lesson I learned from a guy who taught me how to throw pottery back in the 90s. And the lesson is sometimes less is more. I was working away on a pot, and he said, "You're overdoing it." And I realized I had been using that philosophy most of my life. So it's like, oh yeah, that's a good way to say that. And so that'll be kind of the theme of the whole presentation. I'm going to talk about the range of tasks that a passive prehensor can accommodate. And I need to show you what a passive prehensor is.
So Skip, if you reshare your screen, we weren't able to see your presentation yet.
Oh, okay. Can you see me now?
Yes.
And this is a prehensor. Hopefully it's familiar to most of you. You find it on the end of a prosthetic upper limb device, and it's called a Hosmer hook. It has been in use for more than 100 years, And it's still the preferred terminal device for an upper limb prosthetic and a prosthesis. And it's a prehensor because it grasps things. And it usually works by having a cable, a Bowden cable, attached to this lever, which runs through the prosthesis itself and attaches to a shoulder harness. So when the user moves his shoulders, it pulls the string and causes the hook to open. And what we have ended up with in the gripper device, family of devices, is what we're calling a passive prehensor. And this can be a passive prehensor. I can put something into this terminal device without having a string attached to it by using my other hand to insert it into the grip. And so it's not actively grasping, but we're using another hand to make it take a grip. And we're doing that with the Moto Gripper and with the old gripper thumb terminal device with no strings attached. And it's a worth telling story about how we discovered this passive prehensor thing. I started out with a gripper thumb that was printed device that was printed flat. I don't know if you can tell that. Printed flat and then heated up with a heat gun and folded along the creases in the fingers to make a sort of a grip. And I'll tell you how we came up with that idea in a bit. But it was kind of small, but we realized that it actually looked like a hand more than this does. And that was an advantage. And I'll tell you how we got to that. But all of our devices that we're going to talk about today are, in fact, passive prehensors. And so there's a range of things that you can do with the passive prehensor. Two-handed task can usually be accommodated without having an active control of your prehensor device. Oh, I've got washers and everything on here. And it takes practice, and I'm out of practice, but you can see how larger things and smaller things can be manipulated by inserting the thing you want to manipulate into your prosthetic without having an active control. And the problem is, if you are bilateral amputee, you're missing both hands, what are you going to use to put an object into your passive prehensor? So that's when it's nice to have a powered, whether it's body powered or electrically powered, myoelectric and so forth, version of the powered Moto Gripper. And so we'll get on with that in a bit, but there's some other things that we'll discuss in a moment about the value to upper limb amputees. And then, I'm not sharing my screen now, am I? No. So I'm just looking at my outline. The gripper phenomena has actually been used successfully in myoelectric devices, and we'll talk about that. The fabrication technology and the cost are not necessarily accessible to many volunteers, and so we'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll talk about how we eliminated the need for soldering by using paper clips instead of electrical wiring and circuit boards. So now let me try again to share my screen.
So while Skip's sharing a screen, just as a thank or as a reminder, the e-NABLE community uses open source devices that are given for free to device users in need, and the cost of Bionic devices has been prohibitive for really widespread distribution. Most devices, most Moto powered devices are sold for thousands of dollars. So John and Skip were working on really bringing that cost down to tens of dollars.
Can you see my screen?
We can't see the presentation, Skip.
All right.
You were showing the Zoom window that time, but you want to do is show your keynote window.
Yep.
Yeah. Share screen. How about now?
There you go.
Yes,
You got
sir.
it.
Got
So we're
it.
on the
Hooray,
third
hooray.
page. So if you want to go back to that first page really quick and just walk us through, but we didn't see your screen before.
Well, we're going to make this whole stack of slides available to follow up so that you can look at the videos and follow some links and things later. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. The whole thing is that the history of these gripper terminal devices involves a whole lot of inventions that were contributed by a whole lot of people over the course of the whole 8 years that John and I have been together. The development was centered around activities at the Rochester e-NABLE lab, and it all began when I met John in May of 2014. And John and some of his students were putting one of the earlier versions of a 3D printed RIT arm on a 6-year-old boy named Derek. And among those present were a student named Jade Myers and a couple of physical therapists named Nate Ramsey and David Dietz. And David, the guy in the center here, was studying to specialize in hand therapy, and he had a theory about thumbs. His notion was that a thumb really didn't need the middle joint. One joint is enough to make a thumb do everything that a thumb needs to do, or very close to everything. And he spent a whole weekend trying to teach me his idea. He was not very good at drawing pictures and so forth. But I finally got the message. And believe it or not, that's from 8 years ago. And that little lesson that David taught me stuck. And so you'll see that how that's related to what we ended up with in the grippers. And John has already mentioned open source devices. And some of you in the software world may be familiar with a community called, or an organization called Red Hat. They're big promoters of free and open source software in particular. And they made some videos about us that I think is kind of appropriate to show how we at Rochester e-NABLE Lab and in the broader community in general are making use of the fact that everything we do is shared, open source, no patents, no secrets. There's a big advantage to sharing things. So let's just look at a couple of quick videos he just published a sketch, and a high school student on a summer job in a lab across the country. In the same evening, he started working on a CAD design, trying to test John's idea.
He published his findings, and then Steve Wood ended up refining that and making it so that it would work in a hand. And then further, it was refined to what we have currently by Skip Metzi who works at our lab.
and reinvented a device that was named in the 19th century, I think, called a whipple tree. I've been told recently that it was used for horse carriages.
So it was an idea that was taken through different members of the community and finally realized into what it is now.
So today, we now have what's called a tensioner box, which snaps into the grooves of the raptor hand, which contains the whipple tree, which is derived from that whole experimental lineage of half-baked ideas, which is producing a pretty slick package right now.
Yeah, so that was back in, still in 1914, 8 years ago, when we got to that point. And some more follow-on to what was going back very early in the history of this thing that led us to go where we
I'd like to
where
say
we went.
We make children smile, we make parents weep, and we make nerds rejoice. And any of those is actually a real badge of honor, but to be able to do all three all at once, which is what usually happens, is huge. The whole e-NABLE thing was a let's just see what happens, and open source turned out to be the easiest way to do that.
When I first walked into this lab and saw a young man named Derek receiving an arm that was made with a 3D printer, I was just blown away. I couldn't really believe it at all.
So I'm looking down at this and I'm not seeing a hand and some weird plastic thing. I'm seeing two hands.
He says, so I was born without self-consciousness with a hand like this, and my dad and I designed this thing. We use a 3D printer, and he goes, boom, boom, and everyone leaps to their feet. I give him a standing ovation.
Our goal is to totally democratize the process so that any amputee can find an appropriate device and get access to the internet.
We really want to be conservative
Make themselves
with these things, and
assisted mechanical device.
Our mission here is to make these designs available to anyone, anywhere, to provide access, not to protect treasure.
I can't imagine new designs being developed and delivered to the marketplace in a matter of weeks or months, doing it the old way. Being able to share and build on each other's ideas is a whole new world.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to almost like fast pace what you would originally do with research and development. So you have one idea here, and you have another idea here, and you have someone who can help you make that idea either happen or even better.
One set of designs all came together with a project where we built an arm for a child in Mexico, starting from his existing prosthesis that was given to us in September. We'd incorporated all the best things that we've been designing for the past 2 months, and it got there to him just in time for Christmas. So John and I have been doing this together for 8 years. That was all those activities that I just showed you were happening back in 2014. And the original gripper thumb that I showed you earlier actually had a cable attached to it, so it worked like the Hosmer hook. And one of those physical therapists, Nate Ramsey, who was at that first meeting, was transradial amputee himself. And so we used him as a test pilot to test the first gripper thumb hand. And you'll see him taking off his Hosmer hook and replacing it with one of those printed flat and thermoformed into a hand shape.
If this one doesn't work, part of it's going to be the grip strength, and part of it's going to be the position of the bulk of the hand. the extra figures.
I'll go through that little loop with the boat and cable if you want to, but you don't have to.
Oh, yeah. All right, let's see if it works. Now I am able to scratch the legs.
All right. That's pretty important.
That is huge. Yeah. At the very least, it's one step closer. And I'm not getting this strengthening, so I gotta bring in my right hand. I'm using my right hand to pull on this lace.
Okay.
Now I'm kind of holding laces steady with this.
You did it.
All right.
So this was still in early, no, it was at the Maker Fair in Rochester in 2015. So it was a year later. And how we got there was Nate came to demonstrate the terminal devices that he had used to the people working with young Lucy, who was our favorite test pilot. So Lucy wanted to be able to stack cups. She was missing all the fingers on her left hand. And so this is after it was actually at the same Maker Fair that Nate tried his first gripper thumb hand. Lucy tried hers at the same time and could actually find out that she could stack cups, Ray. And there's another point I want to make about what we've been doing in our lab. It's not that we're trying to make a prosthesis that is a perfect replication of the human hand that does everything you can do with the human hand. I actually like to compare it to a assistive device. Like I had a young man named Andrew who came in to the lab and had a congenital hand issue. His 3 fingers in the middle were missing or very deformed and small. And he had a thumb and a pinky that worked fine, but they were not close enough together to be able to grip anything. And so I was giving Andrew my little pitch about, our assistive devices were kind of like having a baseball glove. You can play baseball without one, but you can play a whole lot better if you've got an assistive device called a glove. And Andrew's mother said, well, Andrew has invented an assistive device. And she pulled out this thing that Andrew had made as a handle for a fork so that he could grip it with the hand he had to use. And he could hold a fork with his special handle on it. And he could do tasks, 2-handed tasks like cutting his meat without having somebody to do it for him. And that's a big deal. So not that his assistive device could do everything that he could do with his other hand, but there's very useful things. And as John Schuhl often has said, anything that's significantly better than nothing and it does no harm is a good thing to have. So that's a part of the philosophy we've been using too. So I'd like to show you how we got from this. Can you see me now? Showing my blue hand.
Yep, we can see you, Skip.
Yeah, okay, great. And I talked to I talked to a prosthetist about this time, and he said, we can't use a terminal device that won't grasp things the size of a soda can. It's got to be able to grip something as big as a can of soda, or people won't find it useful. He didn't know about the significantly better than nothing idea. But I took that to heart. So we redesigned the thumb and the shape of the fingers in the hand so that the curvature of the thumb and the grip could accommodate something at least as large as a soda can. And you realize that you only really need 3 points of contact, 1, 2, 3, to grip that. And you can even do better. One volunteer in our community came up with something he called a drinky pinky. This one doesn't have it, but if you design your gripper with the little pinky finger that sits underneath whatever it is you're trying to grasp, it won't slide through. So I'm holding it with a drinky pinky. And we can do that without interfering with other things that you might like to grasp. And so all of this is going on. We've got amputees designing their own assistive devices. You saw Peregrine Hawthorne and his dad way back in the beginning of e-NABLE. That was probably one of the first time that somebody in our community actually designed their own devices. And that's going on all the time. And people who are amputees, including Nate, who just joined us, hi Nate, have an advantage over the rest of us in that they can test the devices that they design in a way that us more able-bodied people, can't see everything that they can see. So, welcome, Nate.
Can I demonstrate what you're just talking about?
Yes, indeed. Please do.
When you're just talking about your cool little pinky adaptation,
Yes.
what about a positionable pinky? If it was printed as a separate print in place joint, like what we talked about before, whereas the whole pinky was all one assembled part, but you'd assemble it onto the,
of course,
palm, but allow it to be positionable, like how the Ark's hand thumb is. I can get you all the tolerances for that. But if you could position the pinky at the different spots, Ahmad Al-Haj Musa in Syria has asked for a cosmetic hand that could be positionable in those different positions. If just the thumb would bend like that, bringing the thumb underneath allows you to hold a phone.
Okay.
And that
excellent.
That right there is worth a lot to a lot of people. It kind of needs a little bit of wrist flexion to be able to tweak the wrist to be able to bend it so you can see it. But if it could work to hold a phone, that's a very usable hand.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And you can play with it. Maybe even the fixed pinky could be positioned in a way that it would assist holding something like a phone.
Similar to how the thumb works too, right? The thumb on the Ark's hand doesn't have any mobility of its own. It's just a solid platform that rotates. But the joints themselves don't operate; they just are in position. So it's very similar to the same concept, and we can go over the tolerances and everything to get the design knocked out, so you don't have to do a whole lot of trial and error.
Excellent. And sharing those things is what makes us so successful.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt in though, Skip. This is our meeting.
Nope. I'm really glad for that. And so the fact that if you are missing both hands, you can be in trouble trying to use a passive prehensor because you don't have another hand to put an object into the grip. And so we were thinking that if you went back to having a powered thumb. It's still a very simple device, but there'd be various ways that you could activate and actuate that thumb with a motor, for instance. And I see Eric Bubar has joined us. Hi, Eric. Can you hear me?
Eric's in another meeting, but he is following.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
using the
Okay.
chat.
It just so happens that I have a little video where Eric is demonstrating a successful bionic design for a gripper, a Moto Gripper that he did back in 2019, before the COVID. and he made a little video of that. Let's see if I can share my screen again. And I'll take his place by showing you the video. Can you see this?
Yep, we can see it's good.
Great.
Here's my mechanical gripper attachment. You've got a regular gripper thumb palm. You've got a thumb that I redesigned to run an internal channel so the string comes down internally. I'll probably work on redesigning this so that the string is internally the whole way through. You've got a motor attachment box that attaches up to the thumb, and then a cover for everything so that everything stays sealed up. And then on the back end, you've got a parametric kind of socket. It's just a circle, so you can design whatever socket back end you want to attach and screw onto here to attach to your user. Got 3 wires that come out of the back. Those are the servo wires, and they connect to everything that's on the back end of this. That fits inside of a basically an iPhone jogging case. You've got 4 AA batteries. You've got Arduino Nano. You've got about 6 jumper cables with proper headers, and you've got a DC power jack so you can plug everything in. All stored inside of a nice little box. The box does come with a cover, and you can screw that cover on. I've just got it open air so you can see everything that's happening on the inside of this. Last but not least, you have a little button. So I've attached the button to this arm band so that I can actuate it with my body motion. You could use different kinds of switches, different kind of buttons, whatever you want to use. This is just the easiest and cheapest option that I've found. So all I need to do is push it against my body with just a light motion. It's a deliberate motion, but light, so it shouldn't trigger accidentally. It takes a little bit of motion to actually actuate the hand. So that'll open the thumb, and it's set up right now on a timer, so the thumb will stay open for a certain amount of time, and then it'll automatically close. And we can program all of that. We can adjust that by changing 1 or 2 numbers inside of Arduino Nano by plugging it into a computer. So it's not that difficult to do. What can we do with this? So we can set it up so that you can actuate the hand. You can hold a pen. So if you want to write some stuff, you can use this to write. So these are all functions that Skip has shown in previous videos with the regular gripper thumb. All we've done now is take that design and put a motor in it so I can open and close it without needing to pull it open with my other hand. So if I've got a fork, I want to pick up a fork, I can pick it up from a table with relatively a little bit of practice, and I can hold the fork pretty securely. In fact, I can hold it secure enough that I should be able to spear my food, and I can take a bite. So I can eat my lunch with this, and then I can just put it right back down. So I can eat. We've got things that you can pick up. You can pick up stuff from table or couch. So I can pick up a remote control. Again, I'm not needing to use this hand at all. It's all through this guy. I can also pick up a can and hold a can relatively securely. So this is about the size of a Red Bull can. I can activate it. I can close it up. I got a nice firm grip. This can's about 3/4 of the way full. And I can take a drink and put it right back down. The timing I've got, find that's what works for me in my testing. But again, that number can be changed to whatever we want. So this is the mechanical gripper. It's about $50 for my design. This is slightly different take on the other mechanical gripper where everything's integrated inside of the palm itself. On that one, your button is on the hand itself, so you can bump the hand against something and that'll make it open on a timer. Not actually on a timer. It's time to open and close is based on the strength of the motor that you have on the inside.
Okay, we're going to run out of time in a minute. So I'm going to follow up on where Eric got. And about the same time, we were working in parallel in our lab and motorizing the thumb with a tiny little motor. What did I do with my tiny little motor? I misplaced it. Anyway, it's very small, as you'll see when I open one of these up. And we found that even like third-year engineering students at two different universities, one in Buffalo and one in Rochester, where John and I were working, were destroying the motors for lack of having soldering skills. Tiny little motor with tiny little connector lugs sticking out of the back of a piece of plastic on the back of the motor. People without soldering skills were destroying the motors just trying to build a device. And so we realized that, you know, we could try to do better. And that's where the paperclip idea came in. I'll just quickly show you that the paperclip idea was not new to this. Back in the 70s, I was working for a little company in South Carolina, a startup. And among the things we made was air fresheners that had a little battery powered fan, and they would blow fragrance essential oils from a little, what did they call them? Stick-ups type thing that we developed a technology for ultrasonic welding to make these. We made a little battery powered fans. And we did the same thing. If I'm strong enough to get it to come apart, the motor just snaps in and it's held in place by essentially what amounts to a couple of paper clips. So there's no soldering, there's no wires, there's just a little spring wire that can be made in a production process for a penny a piece. Thing is called a 4-slide that makes these. And oh, there's a coat hanger wire size wire that pulls this battery contact in and out of contact with the battery. And that's how that works. And oh, by the way, I still have the prototype that I made way back then. And show you how much we can appreciate the 3D printing that we have for prototyping now. Oh, my motor came loose. Anyway, you saw it spin. This, in the 70s, I spent a month making this prototype, even though I knew what I wanted to try to do, using balsa wood and an X-Acto knife and Dremel tool, that sort of fabrication process. And I'll show you, again, how that just snaps into place. You can see the little wires. So you learn something, you find it's useful, and you use it again in another way. The paper clips we had already done, and we had learned from these little battery powered fans, that fan can run continuously on that one D cell for a month without having to replace or recharge the battery, because the required current to run a little fan and evaporate essential oils from that little pad, you know, it doesn't take much energy to do that. And I had that in mind when we were working on the Moto Gripper that we developed in our lab with a lot of help from our friends, with a tiny little motor. I can get this thing to come apart. So there's the chassis, and the tiny little gear motor is here. And as I said, there's the contacts that we have just connected with the tension that's in the little spring wire. We actually prototyped with paper clips and then decided we'll just use paper clips. And we had to develop a way that we could train people to form these paper clips to make these connections. So no soldering was necessary and no switches were necessary. You can see that when you press this wire so that it touches the wire next to it, the motor rotates exactly 1 revolution. And there's a little cam over here that's hitting a part of a paper clip that's leaning against another paper clip. And it maintains the connection until 1 complete revolution is made.
Skip, can you hold it up just a wee bit higher? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Do it
okay.
again, please.
Thank you.
All right.
So this is a crankshaft, and we can use a coupling mechanism to connect that to the thumb itself. Oops. And I struggled to find parts that I could put together and make something that was actually working. And let's see if we can find an angle. You can see how it would pull on the thumb. Whoops. And so, you know, I'm having to hold it in funny positions to make the demonstration. But here's one that's fully assembled. And like Eric said with his design, there's a little button on the side that when you press that, it cranks all the way around and gives you a couple of seconds to pick up something. And you hit it again and you can put the something down. So that little time delay is an important part of it. And oh, by the way, back in 2 years prior to that, we had a summer intern from India named Prashant, who was working with the switch to try to power a motor back and forth to do the same thing. He didn't get there, but he ended up going back to India and putting a lot of gripper thumbs on recipients back in his hometown in India. And, you know, we need to get back in touch with him. I invited him to come to this meeting and see if he ever developed his device. But he was working on a circuit similar in principle to what Eric has done. But if you look at a device that uses electronics, you're going to run the battery down pretty fast. And so you're going to have to charge it pretty often. I don't know how much use a typical transradial amputee could use Eric's device without having to recharge it. He could probably tell us. But
bilateral will be different than just one device too, because if you can fall back on your natural hand, it's a totally different thing than the battery demands that are going to be on somebody that only can use their device. Yeah, good point, Nate. But at any rate, from my experience back decades before, I knew that it was possible to get battery-powered devices that could last a long time if you had no quiescent current. If when the motor was not running, you're not using any electricity at all from the battery, you've got a good device. If it only runs 2 seconds once every few minutes, you know, to grip and to set something down, then you're saving the battery most of the time.
Yeah, Nate.
Sorry, Skip. I've also found it's also about the grip. If it will grip something and hold it and just maintain, it's different than if it's struggling against it the whole time, because that's where you chew up your batteries.
There you go. So if you've got a normally closed device that's held in the grip with a spring or a rubber band, you're not using energy while you're holding on to something. So that's built into all the gripper devices that we've been playing with, including the motor-driven ones.
So Skip, what I've found with the gripper hands that I've used is it doesn't, unless you get a real monster spring in there, in which case you're kind of testing the tensile strength of the plastic itself and the thumb to not break and stuff under the pressure. It tends to not have quite enough pressure to really clamp down on something to hold something firmly. That's and I'm not knocking you at all as a designer.
So there you go.
I have a problem with that with the other ones too, but that to me as a user seems to be the big hurdle to make a really usable device. And the one other thing I'd like to just put in about the whole gripper hand concept going to a myoelectric version. I think what you need to look at, buddy, is adding myo sensors like this. Myoelectric sensors, and obviously you'd use a different printed part than this. This is just made for a test pad, but you'd want to find where the target site is for the muscle, and then you'll just need something that plugs in to a little DuPont cable on the end. So
and Eric has gone a long way towards doing that. He uses a regular myo band to power the servos in his device, but he's using like 4 AA batteries.
Because I think the switch concept is cumbersome as a user goes for the users.
Yeah. So there's always room for improvement. And the iterative design things you're very familiar with. Elon Musk is also familiar with that, as you probably know.
And it's all works in progress,
blowing up rockets, right? That, and it's how good is good enough. And if you can see a way to make it better, iterate again. And that's what we do.
I got one last point for you, Skip. Put a pressure sensor in the thumb and it could control the pressure grip on the whole hand.
Yes.
And if you made the thumb with an opening on the end where you cast the end of the thumb in silicone, you could put the pressure sensor in, cast the silicone over the top so it's flexible, and have it all as one monolithic piece.
So one of the things that this presentation is looking at is the value of low tech. How do you come up with something that's significantly better than nothing using, if possible, found materials? We got less than 10 minutes left. Skip, do you have any last considerations from your presentation before we open for questions?
Yeah, let me just quickly show a little bit of the instructions for building this thing. You can find this on the hub for the Moto Gripper, and John Schul's video instructions for how to make the paper clips work for you. And I'll just show you the beginning of it, and you can go look for it yourself if you want to try to do this.
What is this that we're making?
Well, we're going to make a Moto Gripper. The original gripper had one part, a hand, a thumb, a castration band as a spring, and we use. So you see that this is the square end, and that these two contacts want to be side by side and snugged right up to this little locking post here.
Just show you some examples of.
And notice we've already created what's going to be called our actuator resting post. Now we put 2 screws in, one. got that. It's a bearing.
So yet another innovation, just using paper clips.
Now, this this device is the linkage that connects the crankshaft to the thumb. And you'll notice that there's some paper clips inside. One thing that we learned is that metal against metal, the surface of the paper clips inside of this linkage bearing against the metal screws last a long time. I found that one 9-volt battery would go 10,000 actuations, and that the friction of the surfaces rubbing together, this linkage against the screws, would go 10,000 operations. We counted them with the counter. So that's a lot. Plastic against plastic or plastic against metal won't have that kind of longevity. And if there's any quiescent current, like most electronic circuits have, wristwatches and things like that will obviously run a long time between batteries and between charges. But a lot of electronics have a quiescent current, and I think a lot of the prosthetic devices have to be charged fairly frequently. So that's another advantage of keeping it simple. And I'll break off with that and let some other people talk. Based on what we're looking at, Nate, take a look at yesterday's posting by our friend Jacques Buchanan. Has a new Kwawu hand,
right,
that looks really good, and there's some very simple and elegant designs that he's put into that. So we got volunteers all over the place that are helping us move towards making things simpler. And we'll keep in mind that there are a lot of users, and you're speaking for the amputees who can try out the things that you design, and telling us from your perspective that you do need more functionality than you might find in a gripper thumb. However, we found that the Thai Reach group have put a lot of gripper thumbs, even on bilaterals. The gripper thumbs that don't have a harness, that are just the, what did we call them? Prehensor, the passive prehensors. They had a recipient, driving a car and driving a motorcycle with passive prehensors. There's a lot of things that, bilateral amputees can do with these very simple devices. And so I'd like to encourage all of you who are here now, and those who see this video of this meeting later, well, keep in mind, it doesn't have to replace a hand. That, like an assistive device, like a baseball glove, it can be used for certain tasks, and some users will find that useful. And I did all the talking after all. Sorry about that. Any other final questions or comments before we have to break off at 1?
Skip, I want to jump in just to say I found durability for those silicone like sleeves that we put over the ends of the fingers. They just don't last very well, and especially in places where it'd be hard to source those guys. I've found that actually leaving a little reservoir at the end of the fingers, and then you just fill it in with silicone, but have enough of a thing in there where it can still hold in there and it's durable. I think that's the best solution, and it's really cheap, and it vastly increases the usefulness of the hand, as you can see by putting the little sleeves on the end of the fingers, right?
Yes, and better than those, what do they call those things that we've been using for years?
The Lee Tippy fingertips.
Yeah, the tippies are not the best you can do. And what we've been using in our lab, and we published this, but not everybody knows about it, is pacifier silicone nipples. You can get 2 for $1 at the Dollar Tree store, and you cut the end off of them. And if you're persistent enough, you can just force them onto a fingertip of any of our hands.
And that's very cool to retrofit design, Skip. But if you cast the silicone into the ends, you can just forget about it, and they look more natural as well. And so, but there are 2 different ways to get to the same result. Right. And so, you know, for different applications, people will find different things that work. But those Lee tippies are among the least desirable. But that silicone thing is something you can do with like just your hardware store brand silicone. Just any old silicone works. So that's why it works well for sourcing too. So
we do that some too.
Yeah. Good job though. The grippers, what you were saying before about functionality, as far as simplicity goes, the gripper hand is one of the more functional hands out there, actually, because of its simplicity and because it gives a solid backing to where the thumb can push against. So that part is good. I like the idea of having a more robust servo to work the thumb, so you get a little more grip strength out of the whole thing, and then just having a myo trigger on it. But as far as the device goes, I think it's a valuable device still as far as the e-NABLE library goes.
How about the ease of assembly for the non-motorized gripper and also for the motorized gripper? We found that in spite of John's efforts to come up with a design with paper clips that could be taught to an ordinary human, that's not all that easy for a lot of people to learn to do. What about something with only one moving part and assembly compared to, you know, a Kwawu hand, for instance?
Well, my concept with a bunch of the NIOP gear is to make an adaptable myo design that can just be added on to any of the arms. So you'll just have a myo trigger, like one of these sensors somewhere on the device to trigger off of a muscle action. And then it will trigger one large, robust servo that will pull a linkage that could both do closing and opening operations with the hand. The Autobach hand I have here works off of a concept with a linkage coming up in the middle that pulls both the front 2 fingers and the thumb open and closed at the same time. There's like a V-shaped piece of linkage in there with the connection at the bottom. Pulls like that. And that's German thinking, right? They had their head screwed on right when they did that one, and they put a lot of time and effort into it. So I think that's the best way to create leverage out of the whole thing. And I think using linkage is the best way to transfer the power from the servo to the hand. Now, all of that requires quite a bit of like adaptation in the plastic housing, but functionally the shape of the hand is pretty good. The one problem I have with the gripper design is imprinting the fingers to get the fingers to come out nice on the tips. So if it could be multi-segmented where you did the fingers in one print and the rest of the palm in one, and then just screwed it together so it's still really solid, something like that. And it would be nice if there was both versions, because I realize it looks so much nicer if it's all one piece. But when my printer's on the end of its last leg, you know, it would help if I had one where I could just do the fingers over and over until I got them right. Yeah, you're absolutely right on target with what we've been trying to do too, and having a modular design where you can substitute different components to meet your own needs. And so that's great. Let me ask you, how long do you get on battery life with that Autobot? I've not run out yet, but my prosthetist always told me as soon as you take it off, put it on the charger and charge it. So you can basically use it all day, but you charge it every night. I've got an interesting issue where the socket itself pushes the fluid in my arm, and they did a lovely thing where they pulled out my lymph node glands in my armpit, so it backs up in my armpit. So personal issues, too much information and all, but like I can't wear my prosthetic for more than 6 hours at a time. Well, I've heard that's pretty normal, and some people wear them less than that. Talking to my friends who are like occupational therapists and so forth. You know, that's one problem we have with our volunteers. We don't really get to track the usage.
and follow up with the recipients, like the medical and professional prostitutes may get to do. But anyway, thank you, folks. And you can get back in touch with me if you have any ideas, or get back in touch with Ben and John, who are in touch with me, if you want to contribute to what we're doing and share your good ideas. So thanks for being here, Nate. And,
oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the invite and everything. I appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else, Ben?
Maybe I'll, if you don't mind, I'll share your email address in the chat.
Great.
I also shared the next upcoming event is Monday for Enabling Education with Jeff Powell, and we'll look at a system of 4 universities working together on enable projects in North Carolina. But big thanks to Skip and John today for sharing their work, and it's ongoing. So there's more work to be done, and there's a big value in low tech. We've definitely seen that overseas with different projects outside of the US, where it's just too cost prohibitive or the materials are too difficult to get. So it's a really important thing for us to look at together.
Thank you much. And Ben, you say you'll be able to put my slide deck into the hub for me. That'll be easy to access from people that are going back to look at the Moto Gripper.
Yep. And did you email?
Yeah, I emailed an update, and I've got it in
Okay.
the Apple format and the PDF. And
Great. If you send me a PDF, what I can do is add it to the archive.
okay, look for the update one that I emailed you.
Great. Sounds good. All right. Thanks everybody.
Folks.
Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.